Okay, welcome back, everybody. Time for another Iran war live stream update, as we've been doing for the last couple of weeks. And rejoining me is my longtime good friend and a guy I'm sure you know by now, Sal Mercogliano, the host of What's Going On with Shipping. How are you, Sal?
I'm good, Ward. There's a lot of ships happening out there.
A lot of ship.
A lot of ship
going on, and we're going to talk about all of it here. Thanks for joining us. As people get assembled here, they get their heads ups and migrate over to us. Let's just go around the horn real quick and talk about some of the headlines around the war. First, the Gerald R. Ford has reached Suda Bay, Crete for repairs following a laundry room fire, and Sal and I talked about this in detail a few live streams ago, that injured, reportedly, the numbers vary, Sal, but 200 is the number, the highest number I've seen. One seriously enough to be airlifted. The fire lasted 30 hours, causing extensive damage and displacing 600 sailors from their berthing. Their racks were destroyed and are being replaced by ones from the USS John F. Kennedy, CVN 79. You guys remember we did an episode from the flight deck at Kennedy at HII a few months ago. Kennedy is the second in the Ford class, as I just said, under construction at HII, and they just finished builders trials in January, so they're taking the racks from Kennedy and sending them to Ford. As the spotter video from the shoreline of Crete shows, the air wing is still aboard. I was wondering whether or not they had flown off, but some individual growlers and the electronic attack jets and E-2 Hawkeyes may have flown off to bases in Israel and Jordan to stay in the fight as the carrier undergoes repairs. No official estimates for how long Ford will be sidelined and whether it will return to the supporting the war once repairs are complete or start its long overdue trip homeward. At last report, Ford's relief, the USS George H.W. Bush CVN 77, which is the last Nimitz-class carrier, still hasn't left its home port of Norfolk, Virginia, and it takes 6 to 10 days to transatlantic to reach the Med, and then whether they'll go east Med like Ford did at the beginning of the war or transit the Suez into the Red Sea, we do not know. So a lot up in the air with respect to a two-carrier presence. Abraham Lincoln remains in the North Arabian Sea. Over the weekend, President Trump gave the Iranians 48 hours to open up the Strait of Hormuz, or he would order strikes on power stations. But yesterday, he posted this on Truth Social, modifying the threat, claiming that, quote unquote, productive negotiations had started with the Iranians, and he was willing to postpone the strikes for 5 days, quote, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions, end quote. But the Iranians said none of that was true. They actually used the term fake news, and that no government officials had spoken to Trump. But Israeli sources suggest that negotiations are about to happen in Islamabad, with Pakistan acting as the mediator. Meanwhile, Iran launched another wave of ballistic missiles at Israel overnight as the IDF continued strikes on targets in Iran. So, Sal, what is the latest around the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I mean, we're not seeing much significant traffic still going through. The biggest kind of update we have is the fact that the Iranians' toll gate seems to be in force. They are allowing select vessels to sail through their territorial waters in and out. We know that they've been negotiating with countries like China and India and a few others to allow select passage in and out of the straits. Now, this is a significant problem because we have somewhere in the range of 3,200 vessels. Now, that's every vessel in the Persian Gulf, I will note. The big vessels is maybe about 1,000 big vessels, cargo vessels, tankers, container ships. In and around the area, 20,000 mariners that are pretty much locked in there right now and can't make the transit through. Obviously, the U.S. is executing its operational plan sequentially. It's been working at targeting Iranian leadership. They're degrading the Iranian military. We've seen the Iranian Navy basically disappear from the ocean. They're working on targets in and around the Strait of Hormuz area. No indication yet, although there are rumors about mining, still no positive indications of mines in and around the strait. We're still seeing vessels transit through. The most significant issues we've had that's changed, Ward, has to be the decision over the weekend and end of the last week to allow, number one, Iranian oil to be sold on the global market, to withdraw sanctions against that. Iran is loading tankers at Karg Island. And, there were 2 tankers loading the other day. That's 4 million barrels of oil. That's $400 million. And the U.S. government is allowing that to be sold. One of the things that we see right now, the Trump administration is doing everything it can to ensure that there is oil in the global marketplace to kind of deal with the rising cost at the pumps for everybody. We've seen almost $1 rise of gas at the pumps right now. Obviously, until the strait can be reopened, that's going to be an issue. Talking to ship companies, talking to crews out there, what they're waiting for is some kind of security, some sort of idea that we will see a secure ability to sail through the strait and not get an attack. We had an attack outside the Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf of Oman against a Kuwaiti liquefied petroleum gas carrier. We believe it was an aerial drone that did that attack, but the number of attacks have decreased. We have not seen an uptick in attacks in and around the region. We know that the U.S. is moving forces once again. The Tripoli ARG came through the Strait of Hormuz. We saw the USS Canley, which is an expeditionary support base, sail through the Singapore Straits, not Strait of Hormuz, come through the Singapore Straits into the Indian Ocean. The Tripoli ARG with the 31st MEU on board is in the Indian Ocean. We know that the LCSs, 2 of the 3 LCSs were seen in and around the area that have the mine-sweeping capability. And now the latest is the Boxer ARG with the 11th MEU has sailed from San Diego. They're making a passage across the Pacific at this time. So we're definitely seeing the movement of forces closer to it. But with the withdrawal of the Ford through the Suez Canal, that does raise an issue. There's a lot of concern, I will tell you, about the Houthi in the Red Sea. We've seen a lot of ships shift down to Yanbu on the Red Sea. That is the terminus of the Saudi pipeline. So the Saudi pipeline ramped up from about 1 million barrels per day. It's trying to get up to its max capacity of about 5 million barrels per day. But we've seen a huge amount of vessels arrive in that area. Obviously, should the Houthis rear their head again, which is always a fear that's out there, that can cause more disruptions if the Bab el-Mandeb goes the way of the Strait of Hormuz. But right now, we haven't seen any really substantial change in the movement of ships through Hormuz.
So here's the latest snapshot of the strait. So to your point, I don't know if there's any granular intel you can provide here. Again, the color code, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so the red ships are tankers, green are cargo ships. And what you see here is smack dab in the center there of your screen. That's the strait. So the strait's 21 miles wide. You'll hear some people say that it's only 2 miles wide. That's the traffic separation scheme, but it's a deep water strait. I mean, it is very wide. It's actually not easy to close the strait because of its width. It's a deep water strait. You're talking about anywhere from 50 to 80 meters. So we're talking about 150 to 250 feet of water here. So deep water. But what we've been noticing is ships that have been transiting this area are going between that little island at the very top there of the strait, Larak Island, round little island there, and Kisham Island, which is that long kind of elongated island there. They've been routing through there. That's not the normal passage. What we think is Iran is forcing the ships to kind of sail into Iranian territorial waters, be visually confirmed. And there's a report from Lloyd's List that they may be paying off the Iranians about $2 million a toll to go through that area. So this is a really interesting problem because obviously the U.S. does not want to cede control of the Strait of Hormuz to Iran, yet Iran is exercising kind of a toll gate here to get in and out of the straits. We're still seeing at most single-digit ship passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Traditionally, on average, it's about 138 ships a day go through the Strait of Hormuz. So we're just seeing a trickle right now go through. And the ships in the Persian Gulf right now are experiencing some issues, low fuel, low food. The ships have to be sailing to produce water because of the heat exchange. They need the heat off their main engines to run their evaporators, but at the same time, they're worried about low fuel. So there's a lot of issues associated with the crews stuck out there. And we know, for example, there are 5 U.S. ships with about 125 mariners that are stuck inside the Strait of Hormuz right now.
So let's do a little bit of a deep dive on the ARG/MU presence and do a little bit of a 30,000-foot explainer what an ARG is and what a MU is. Now, in my last episode, we were talking about where are they going to go. So we'll talk about that in a second, but let's first set the scene. So as you mentioned, Sal, Boxer underway, not no notice, but earlier than planned, an accelerated deployment. What's wrong with this picture, Sal?
What's wrong with this picture? Oh, you're going to make me guess here.
Look at the flight deck.
Everything.
Look at the flight. Look at just after the superstructure.
It's got Harriers on it?
Yes, Harrier. So this is a dated picture.
Oh, yeah, because Boxer has been outfitted for F-35s.
Yes. So I actually use
I got some aviation cred here. Mooch.
Yeah.
I'm going to run with it right now, so I appreciate that.
Love it. So I actually made this the first thumbnail, and then I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, hold it. Those are Harriers. So Boxer underway. Here's a more updated picture. You can see there's F-35s on the fantail. So in the ARG is Comstock, which is and what? Comstock is an LSD, Whidbey Island class, which has a smaller flight deck at the aft end of the ship. It has a well deck. Now, some folks were calling me out in this one because I intimated that Tripoli had a well deck. That's not what I meant to say. What I meant to say was that the USS New Orleans has a well deck. So yes, Tripoli does not have a well deck, and we're talking about the difference between a WASP class, which Boxer is a WASP class amphibious assault ship, and Tripoli is a America class amphibious assault ship that does not have a well deck, which was sort of controversial. The reason they did that is they want more hangar space, more space for fuel, etc. So in the Boxer amphibious ready group is Comstock and LPD-27, the USS Portland. So here's a fun fact, Sal. I did my youngster cruise. After your plebe year, you go on your youngster cruise to Little Creek aboard the USS Portland, LSD-37, that was welded to the pier. We never left the pier the whole time on my youngster cruise, and I had a really good time. But this is the modern version of the Portland, an LPD, which is a San Antonio class amphibious transport dock. So we've got the Comstock is a Whidbey Island class dock landing ship, and Portland is a San Antonio class amphibious transport dock. So a lot of times we, the what we used to call the brown water Navy or amphibs live in kind of the shadow of the carrier strike group, certainly, in my experience. But they're sort of entering the forefront here with what it is they may do. So as you mentioned, Tripoli is on station. Last seen, going through the Malacca Straits of Malacca there. And now they actually have arrived in theater. Boxer's 3 days out of San Diego, so it'll be a while. Again, I'm an East Coast sailor, so how long do you think it'll be before they arrive in the North Arabian Sea?
For Boxer, that's a long haul. I mean, we're talking about probably at least 2 weeks, if not 10 days. More than that, it depends how fast they got out and what kind of expedited passage they're taking. So
a MU is basically three components. There's the ground combat unit, there's the air combat unit, and there is the logistics combat unit. So each MEU brings, or I'm sorry, each ARG brings a MEU with it, and it's a battalion landing team. So battalion size force, which is somewhere between 2,200 and 2,500 Marines. They have a variety of they have kind of the same air combat unit, which is F-22s, F-35s. As you see here, Bs, V-22 Ospreys for medium lift assault support. This is a Viper, the four-bladed Hueys of Venom, and then heavy lift from the Sea Stallions. Here's the battalion landing team getting aboard V-22s. So this is the same for both Tripoli ARG and Boxer ARG. So basically, when it's all said and done, we'll have about 5,000 Marines with, again, this is where we get into the conversation, Sal, is it safe to transit the strait when they get there, right? And as I described in this episode, if you can transit the strait, then you can use your AAVs, which are these, and also these LCACs, which are kind of cool, the hovercraft. When I lived in Virginia Beach, the LCACs were at Fort Story, and you'd see them come and go, and pretty amazing capability, very high speed, fly, drive right on the beach, sort of stuff. So this is traditional Marine Corps, kind of stuff, amphibious landing kind of stuff. So Sal, obviously the ability to transit the strait is kind of the pivot point of our ability to find an exit ramp at this point. And it seems, based on President Trump's statements during the weekend, that he's looking for an off ramp, let's just say. And, the price of gas is going up, and, the nation's sort of at odds as to whether this is a war we need to be involved in. But we are escalating in terms of force that we're putting in theater and about to put in theater. So what do we think is our best way to open the straits? And what do we think the Marines are going to do when they get there?
So, I mean, obviously we've talked a lot, and you talked about it. Karg Island is kind of an obvious one, but Karg Island is 400 nautical miles inside the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, it's all the way up in the Persian Gulf. And obviously one of the big things that the U.S. is talking about, and you saw that with discussions by Secretary Bessent, Secretary Wright, and all the other major secretaries that went on the Sunday shows over the weekend, was the priority to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And let's not forget, too, the Marines have been adopting a kind of a new strategy recently, and this is the littoral regiments. And the idea about seizing islands in the first island chain, the focus had been largely on China and the Pacific theater. But Persian Gulf works here, too. There's a series of small little islands inside the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, you've got the southern shore of the Strait of Hormuz with Oman and the UAE, and islands that Iran has, Larik Island, Kishim Island, but a series of other small islands in and around, just inside the Strait of Hormuz. Those could be objectives for the Marines. Again, we don't know exactly what they're going to do, but these are mission tasks that Marine ARGs and the Marine littoral regiments, the new littoral regiments, have been looking at. You can put Marines onto these islands. They can establish fires for both anti-ship and anti-air. That would provide some coverage without having always to risk a naval vessel in that area. Puts you on land, allows you to establish that position. You can resupply by air or a small vessel. That would be a potential avenue you would see. Obviously, the U.S. wants to move more forces into the area. They're going to need surface vessels. They're going to need to coordinate with allies in and around the Gulf. I assume that is being done right now through NAVCENT, Navy Central Command, U.S. Fifth Fleet. And so plans are being done for that. The concept of convoying, which is one that's being talked about a lot, go back to the Ernest Will, the 1980s, the tanker war, that is very small. I mean, the problem with physically escorting tankers and through is you only get a few ships through, maybe 5 to 10, nowhere near the volume you need. And the concern here is the small scale attacks from the Iranians, the aerial drones and surface drones that they can use. We haven't really seen, except for very initially on, any sort of missile attacks by the Iranians. I think the U.S. has done a great job, obviously, in suppressing that, or the Iranians have done a very good job in hiding it. That's the problem you have. But obviously, once the U.S. is ready to make that force of the Strait of Hormuz, they're going to do it in a big way. We're going to see, obviously, Burke-class destroyers going through. We may see the amphibious units being used to deploy forces onto the small islands in the region. I think that may be a potential that we see developing. Obviously, it's a concern. It's a threat. One of the things that we've seen is that use of those Marines become a bargaining chip. We saw that in the first Persian Gulf War, where they were used to kind of be the diversion force for the big right hook that went into Iraq and via Saudi Arabia. So again, this brings more leverage for discussions against the Iranians to do this. I also have to think too, another potential use for them would be to stop Iranian tankers. Should the U.S. decide to back away from its policy, allowing the Iranian tankers to flow, these forces could be used to interdict Iranian tankers, do forceful takedowns like we saw with the Venezuelan tankers, the ESBs that are moving, the Canley in particularly, which just came through the Malacca Straits and is now in the Indian Ocean. That is a large deck platform. It's a modified super tanker, has one of the largest flight decks in the Navy, except for the LHA, LHDs, and obviously the carriers. That's basically a floating island from which you can do expeditionary basing. You can also operate Marines off there if you needed to. So I think the U.S. is bringing a lot of forces to bear. You know, I raised the question earlier. Interesting that we're doing it now, not a little bit earlier, but we're seeing those movements take place now. We're also seeing some aerial movements of some interesting elements that I'm sure Rain can talk about later on. But one of the things we're seeing is some reinforcements heading into the area. So I think that's the next kind of elements that I'm watching for right now. But right now, the Iranians are talking to shipping lines, talking to individual countries about getting some cargo moving. Not sure we're going to see the Europeans or the EU or Asian nations arrive to do much else.
Yeah, Roger that. So let's look at this courtesy of the folks at San Diego Webcam that do a great job. So V-22s, then you have the Venoms, which are the four-bladed Hueys, and the Vipers, which are the four-bladed Cobras, or also known as a Super Cobra here. As the ship goes by, you can see it does have self-protect capability. So to your point, Sal, if there was USV or a UUV coming at them, they could take it out in close. Not ideal, probably not the way they want to go. What you don't see on the flight deck as the ship is leaving and going out Point Loma here, this is the loneliest transit, having done it once. You know, when you're leaving Point Loma, it's just because you're right downtown San Diego. And then suddenly you're in the Pacific Ocean. You can see a Sea Stallion flying by there in the distance, probably going to come aboard once they make sea room. And then I imagine the Air Wing is going to fly aboard from Miramar, the Marine Corps Air Station there, formerly, as we know, Naval Air Station, but now Marine Corps Air Station, has been for some time. And then they'll have the full air combat element aboard, and they'll make best speed. I don't know if they'll stop in Hawaii for additional stuff or whatever. But as you say, this is a pretty long transit to get to theater. So what I think is Epic Fury, as written at the outset, is a 4-5 week campaign. So we're on what? It started on February 28th. It's now March 24th. So we're 3.5 weeks into it. So we've got another week and a half before the chairman or Admiral Cooper, CENTCOM, goes to the National Command Authority and says, okay, we've executed, we've hit every counter-regime, counter-nuclear, counter-military target we had, and then reattack the ones that popped up. We allow that there will be things we got to hit along the way, you know, drones, mobile SAMs, 358s that Rain and I were talking about last time, a really, you know, nightmare fuel, Sam, that's emerged here, that we're wondering whether that's what hit the F-35 the other day. So there will be things to attend to. Maybe part of the operation will now shift from Epic Fury to a no-fly zone over Iran. And perhaps that's part of what a negotiation could demand from the Iranians. You could see that in the realm of possibility, not unlike what happened in Iraq. As a veteran of Southern Watch, did that quite a bit towards the end of my career. So we could see that. And that would be Super Hornets and Eagles and F-22s in company with Strike Eagles, with F-16s and Growlers. So any pop-up threat, just like we did with Prowlers and Tomcats and Hornets, Legacy Hornets back in the day, sometimes you'd get lit up. You're like, okay, SA-2, spike, 2 o'clock. The Prowlers would go over there, triangulate, and generally by that time they'd stop transmitting because they knew they were about to get hit. But we actually did a thing called Desert Fox because they were getting a little frisky. As soon as we left, Enterprise came in. They basically executed our war plan. We did all the work. They got to do the 3-day war. So you could imagine something like that over Iran going forward. That would demand a lot of presence. It would cost a lot of money, gas in the air, all those sort of things. I mean, that's kind of why we stopped doing Southern Watch, is because it was very expensive. And the Bush 43 administration is like, how we can fix this? Let's invade Iraq. That didn't prove to be very cheap either, but you can see that happening. Okay. So meanwhile, we're like, okay, how do we keep the strait open? So here comes, about coincident with the end of this target plan that we wrote, a while ago, weeks ago, and we're executing. Now Boxer arrives on station. Now you have potentially enough presence, enough capability between the two ARGs to execute something. Like you said, is it these islands with, sort of closer to the strait, or do you push all the way north to Karg and do what I did in that, I imagine we would do in that episode, my last, or 2 episodes ago, put boots on the ground in Karg Island. So I don't know if you caught the soundbite of Lindsey Graham, Senator Graham, jumping up and down about, we got to take Karg Island. That's what we got to do. Okay, that doesn't come without risk, because now instantly both ARGs, as soon as they get in the Persian Gulf, are now a target for starters. And then part B is, once you land Marines on Karg, now they're a target. And I'm not talking about, can they take the island? Yes, they can take the island. They can hold the island, but they're going to get hit, in ways that perhaps whatever, air threat net we establish, counter drone, counter ballistic missile, there's going to be things that leak through, not unlike what's happening in the Arab states and Israel right now. For all the ballistic missiles we've hit, all the drone factories, all the counter drone capability we have in the air 24/7, there's still weapons that are getting through and causing mayhem, which is what they intend. And there's enough mayhem, as you've pointed out, a little bit of mayhem, and now insurance rates are still sky high. Shippers are not willing to go through there, and the strait remains closed. So what is the hourly/daily cost with the strait being where it is right now? Let's look at this picture.
So, I mean, the big issue you have with the strait is obviously, we look at basically globally, there's about 100 million barrels of oil produced, loaded daily around the world. And about 20% of that comes out of the Persian Gulf. Now, we have oil that's afloat on ships. We have oil that's in storage. And what we've been seeing done here recently through both the Trump administration and other administrations is doing what we can to maximize the oil that's out there. So that's why you unsanction Russian and Iranian oil. It's why you see China, the United States, and Japan dipping into their strategic reserves right now. What everyone's trying to do is push out the time when we run into basically the brick wall where we need to open up the Persian Gulf and get oil flowing again. And I would argue that, that initial estimate we had from the United States talking about that we're not going to look at exporting till the end of the month. which was very early. I mean, that was one of the very first statements that came out. We're not looking at basically doing convoy operations to the end of the month. That seems to be coinciding very well. I mean, with the arrival of the Tripoli, with the routing of Boxer, you would want to move some other assets in place. You would have to get some reservists from the U.S. Navy activated for secure comms, what they call tactical advising officers and convoy specialists activated. You could foresee that by the end of the month, some sort of movement by the United States to shift military forces to provide the coverage necessary to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to get oil and energy flowing again so that we don't cause a permanent disruption across the globe. Yes, we only get a very small percentage of the oil out of the Persian Gulf, 2-3% comes to the United States. But what happens is because of that disruption, oil is flowing, and more important, refined product is flowing out of the United States to backfill across the world. That is causing escalation of costs in the United States. So you see the administration really working to minimize that impact, but it's not impossible to minimize it with fuel costs going up $1 a gallon. So I think by the end of the month is when you start seeing, and I agree with you, about 4 or 5 weeks is that time frame to degrade the Iranian military. You don't 100% shift back, but you can start freeing up some assets to start working in that, time frame where you can basically get more coverage in. It also works with the window potentially for Ford to get back operational, or for Bush to get in-shopped into the area should she depart in the near future here.
So here's a very specific question for you, Sal, from Power of Your Brains. What's going on right now with LNG Jamal? I don't know.
So one of the things we're seeing is India has been working with, I think that's one of the Indian LNG vessels right now. That is basically India has been working with Iran to get Indian LNG, LPG, energy vessels out. And we think the Indian Navy is out in the Gulf of Oman. They are picking up ships coming out to escort them in. We know the Pakistanis are doing that, but we also think the Indians are paying for this. We think they're paying that money right now to be able to run those vessels in and out of the straits. That is what we expect. India is very concerned. We've already heard about brownouts in Pakistan because of shortages in energy. India is worried about the same thing. They're worried about escalating costs. It's one of the reasons the U.S. desanctioned 60 million barrels of Russian oil that's out there. One of the big nations that's profiting from this war, probably more than anybody else, is Russia. Russia's gotten a little bit of legitimacy here in being able to sell oil that previously had been sanctioned out on the open market. And again, it's a strange argument to hear Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, out there talking about how we can desanction Iranian oil, but it's not really helping Iran. It's a very strange argument. It's a long one. I don't want to go into it because it's a very complicated one. But again, this is what we're trying to do to shore up the global energy market while the U.S. and Israel conducts this campaign so that we can transition and open up the strait.
Yeah, to your point, the logic starts to tie itself in knots in terms of addressing the price of oil and why do we step off the line of departure even. So here's another question from Carrie Ladd 863. Has the last of the Tomcats been taken out or what? So they have done a lot of strikes on Isfahan, which is where the Tomcats are based. And from the FLIR footage that I've seen, in addition to the Rising Lion footage that we saw some months ago, my assumption is the answer is yes. They've all been taken out, which, I was on, who did I talk to? I talked to NPR or something the other day about, what are my feelings about the F-14, potentially going away like this. And of course, you have an affinity for the platform that you spent a large portion of your adult life, in. That was my office, the backseat of the F-14. It's a beloved airplane, as we all know. I don't have to explain to any of you guys why this airplane has that mystique. It's like a muscle car, right? So it does sadden me that they're all gone now. There was some solace that somewhere in the world there may have been an F-14 airborne. But tactically, it's kind of a no-brainer. You got to take out all their capability. An F-14 would not be much of a match against a Super Hornet, certainly not a Raptor or an F-35, even with the best pilot in Rio, just because of the antiquated radar system and how your forward quarter missiles, et cetera, your ability to do off-bore sight, all the stuff we talk about on a regular and persistent basis here. So, but you could launch one and you can't see you can't kill what you can't see. And so maybe some guy gets through and then he guns an F-35. That could happen, right? So that's a long answer, Carrie, for I think they're all gone, unfortunately. So speaking of Esfahan, Sal, this is, as we talk about what happens next or how does this end? And what's emerging is the dual narratives and divergent narratives between the Israeli end state and the U.S. end state. And so I think the Israelis really do want to have regime change. And it seems, again, based on the president's most recent statements and other political wins, that we're looking for not cut and run, but a endpoint that we can claim that it was worth it. And so we have affected regime change, and they're sort of using the analog of absolute resolve in Venezuela to say that, look what happened there. Take Maduro out, put whatever her name is, Marcy, in there, and she's more friendly to America. We now de facto have better control of their oil resources, and that's great. Okay. However, that's not what's playing out quite yet here. We've cut off the head times 3, although we don't know what the status is of the Ayatollah's son. We know he was injured in that original attack, but we don't even know where he is. We're not sure if he's communicating with the Republican Guard. We've taken out a couple of security chiefs, but it's always next man up. So let's say we have not affected regime change. So as a function of that, they will continue to create mayhem and use the Strait as a leverage point in a way that disrupts global markets and affects price of oil, and we have to attend to. So I am hearing, and I've heard this from 2 sources now, that whatever you would call it, would it be the resistance in Iran proper, the folks who never liked the regime, they're not quite the Shah part 2, because people are talking about the Crown Prince, but they would be kind of more Western friendly, not kind of, but very much more Western friendly, not all of the religious jihadism and the proxies and all that sort of thing. What they are saying at this point, again, I've heard this from 2 credible sources, both Iranian expats, one a former Tomcat driver who now lives in Canada, but they're like, if you guys keep the press on, meaning don't pull out yet, and so this is sort of the Israeli thing, then like complete regime change is possible. Because everybody's saying nobody, that girl burning the picture of the Ayatollah with a cigarette, she's not going to knock over the Republican Guard. Protesters are still getting hung and killed in the streets. They're like, look, I got it, but don't be fooled by coverage of the regime. They're on their ass. They're on the run. They're at their last gasp, desperation. That's why you're seeing these ballistic missiles and this sort of threats to the Strait. But if you keep the press on, and I'm not sure what this means in terms of American special ops or CIA assistance, kind of a thing to make this happen. But they're like, we have the will and the means to topple this regime and institute a more not Jeffersonian democracy, but Western friendly. It'll still be a Muslim culture, Islamic culture, but it won't be an Ayatollah and clerics, and will also dismantle the Republican Guard. So I don't know if you've heard anything along these lines, because that is a better prognosis than what I was hearing via certainly mainstream media coverage of the war.
Yeah, no, I don't have any sort of insight on that area. And like I said, I try to tend to focus on what my specialty is, which is on the shipping side, and focusing on that. And the key for obviously is the degrading of the Iranian military and their ability to really strike out. But you're right. The one kind of play card they have right now is their control of the Strait of Hormuz, or their seemingly control of the Strait of Hormuz. Again, I think right now it hasn't been challenged. And I think that's the aspect. And, I think that's the next element here that has to be done, is challenge their control for the Strait of Hormuz. Because by executing de facto control, by forcing these ships to run through this toll booth, to pay money if that's what's happening, to negotiate with them, that's giving legitimacy to the Iranian control. Again, we're in this very interesting position where we've seen challenges to freedom of navigation on the high seas for quite a few years now. I mean, you go back to Russia and Ukraine on the Black Sea, the Houthi on the Red Sea, and now this in the Strait of Hormuz. It's a big challenge. And if you've removed Iran's ability to become a major influence in the region, either through its nuclear program or its ability to export out its kind of, its political will, the only thing left is control of the Strait of Hormuz, is to impact the economic plight of the world. And once cargo and ships start flowing through, which I think will happen, I mean, it will happen, there's no question about that. The question is, what is going to kick this going? And it's going to take an effort now by the United States to do that, or else, again, de facto controls. Last week was a very mixed message coming from the Trump administration on this. They asked for help, then they demanded for help, and then they said, we'll go it alone. Then they said, we're not going to do it. So again, we're just getting, just a mess of messages here about what is happening. But I do think the key here is, right now, what everyone is trying to do is sustain the global economy so we don't see a free fall in energy, around the globe. And then we're going to have to come to that inflection point where someone's going to have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to, commit to opening the Strait of Hormuz and removing that? Because once Iran loses that ability to exercise control, I think they have very limited control beyond, what's inside their borders. And as you know, maybe they don't even control that very well.
Well, I don't think that's two different things. That's one thing, right? Controlling the Strait of Hormuz equals the stability in the global markets, right? So,
right. No, you're right about that.
We have
Exactly.
to do that. So Dr. Mangler says 100% with Ward, on the run Muslim culture without the Islamism. Huge difference. No problem with average Muslims. Islamism is another sick puppy, hand chopping worldwide caliphate. And that's what, obviously, if you're avowed to kill all the infidels, if that's your stated goal, then that's not productive in the League of Nations and in the world trade. That doesn't make you a very productive partner. So I think most reasonable people feel that same way. Alpha Omega 9198 says, look like the regime is still intact. So that's what's frustrating, right? When President Trump says, I'm negotiating, and they're like, no, you're not. Fake news. Like, who are we talking about? Who are you talking to there? Because it's like what you hear from critics is there's nobody to negotiate with right now because of what Dr. Mangler just said, right? The regime's on the run. Their heads down. Ayatollah Jr. is in hiding. He's in the bunker and he's not going to pop his head up because he knows that Mossad will be waiting for him, or, IDF F-35. So there is the illusion that we haven't toppled the regime. Or no, I'm sorry, not an illusion. It doesn't look like we've toppled the regime. So I concur with that, Alpha Omega. But it's definitely not intact. This is what those who are like, stay the course and we can have enough momentum to affect regime change. Right now, they're like, you pull out, then whatever is left can reconstitute, and now you will have an intact regime. Here's a great question from Patrick Lobos 305. What is the U.S. response if Marines are killed on Karg Island? Total all-out war or precision strike? So this is the boots on the ground gambit, Sal, right? And again, I am old enough. I was in flight school when the Beirut bombing happened.
Yep.
So that Spectre, and is the son of a Marine and the father of a Marine and the brother of a Marine, That specter lives very much in my psyche. So you don't want to put Marines in a place where there is no real mission, really, and they're just targets. The Reagan administration believed that just putting Marines at the airport was going to calm the war down, and that turns out that's not true when you're facing Hezbollah and other Islamic, terror organizations. So what do we think about this? What would our response be if any Marines are killed?
Well, I think, number one, I'm having a hard time process Carg Island because, again, our policy toward Iranian oil is let it flow and open it up. So I don't know. It's counter to the policy that the Trump administration is doing right now. But again, that doesn't mean we don't change policy and do that. Obviously, seizing Carg Island is a significant event. I mean, the analogy here is you've got to, you don't need to hold all of Carg Island. You just need to stop the flow of oil out of Carg Island. That's the key right there. Carg Island is the bottom of a massive pipeline system that terminates down there. And I mean, you can do that by several ways. You can grab the pumping stations, you can knock out the pumping stations, you can seize the pumping stations. You don't need to seize all of Carg Island. But if you start introducing either U.S. Marines or the 82nd Airborne or Ranger Regiment or whoever's going to go in and grab Carg Island, if that is the scenario, that's going to create escalation, because I would assume if Marines are killed there, you're also probably fighting the Iranians on the island, because you've got to imagine the Iranians have reinforced the island. They know it's a target. It's going to be a very visible target for them, even though we did strikes on the military side. I think it gets you into, a ground war, which is the thing that we're trying to prevent. I think seizing some of the islands out in the Strait of Hormuz and in the lower Persian Gulf are more isolated, maybe not as many forces on those islands. You may not have it as much. Carg Island is the jugular of the Iranian economy, and that's the key right there. Yes, they have another terminal at Jask, which is outside the Strait of Hormuz, but nowhere near as big as Carg Island. And Carg Island is what's generating the revenue still for the Iranians. So I think killing Marines and seizing the island is probably as important there. So again, every time you escalate, you raise the risk of what happens next. And for a president who talked about not getting involved in ground wars and avoiding wars as much as he can, that is a huge escalation in a conflict where he said he wasn't going to commit forces. So again, I just don't know.
Well, what about this threat that, let me bring up that post again. So, it's like, I'll give you 48 hours and okay, now I'm going to give you 5 days. So not just Carg Island, because I want to ask you, what happens to global markets if we take out Carg Island, meaning strike it? And then if we go after the rest of their power grid, what effect would that have on their willingness to surrender, I guess?
So first of all, the economic guy in me looks at that and says, man, I can't help but notice that he rescinds that just before the market opens, on Monday. And then, the 5 day is right there when the market closes. So,
also stock prices skyrocketed as soon as he announced that he's not going to strike, so it's kind of feels like a little bit of manipulation of markets. I don't know if you want to be cynical about it.
I'm not cynical about it, but I think it's an element. Economics is always an element that you have in a conflict and everything about that. Listen, knocking out Carg Island, going against the power systems in Iran, when you back Iran into a corner, when you start hitting that and you start taking out their ability to sustain themselves and their economics, that opens the door there for Iran to basically do whatever they want in the Strait. And that's mines. That's the issue of mines. But at the same time, the U.S. is doing everything it can to minimize that deployment of mines. What's the statement that Admiral Cooper talks about is, you want to kill the mines before they ever get out on the Strait. So you deploy, you destroy their ability to field that. The problem you have is, as we've seen before, is that the Ukrainians have demonstrated this, the Houthi have demonstrated this. You don't need a navy to go against ships. There are indirect methods of doing that. And it's very hard to kill all the gnats in the swarm. And that's the problem we're dealing with. We're great at shooting down the flock of birds, but it's the storm of gnats that come at you that you got to be worried about. because they can come at you in a way. And, I've used this analogy before with you, I think, is, if you tell a military guy you had a 99% chance of success, they're going to take that in a minute. That's a slam dunk. You tell a commercial guy there's a 1% chance of failure, they're going to look at how do I minimize my risk? And that's going to keep everybody kind of locked up right here. And so, we're dealing with not just a military operation, but an economic operation to get 25% of global energy flowing again. And yeah, maybe it's not our responsibility, but if we don't do this, it's going to impact us. And I think that was the plea from the president talking to the rest of the world. It's like, listen, you may disagree with me. You may disagree with the operation that the U.S. and Israelis are doing against the Iranians, but you have to disagree with what the Iranians are doing in basically closing off energy to the world, which you need much more than we do. And so I think that's the argument that I'm interested to hear is going on in the background and being discussed, because that is being talked about in capitals and with U.S. ambassadors and in other countries. It's like, listen, you can disagree, but this is going to hurt you economically. You're going to run into trouble here if we don't get this energy spigot up and running again.
Yeah, they're going to have to deal with it sooner or
and everything else. There was a key point there on fertilizer, on liquefied natural gas, on sulfur, on helium. I mean, again, we focus on oil, but there's so many other commodities that come in and out of this region that are so critical.
So Roach 13. Thank you for the super chat. Cool bird of prey there as the avatar. Whoever replaces the regime would need to reverse the mismanagement of scarce water resources within the country to get any support from the people. Water scarcity caused a lot of the protests. That's a good point. And let's look at, so the other thing is we're talking about the idea that we would strike or put boots on the ground. Just look how big Iran is, and look where Tehran is relative to any line of approach. Unless you're coming from the stands, that's a long haul. So there, again, we have airborne capability, 82nd, 101st. We don't have to walk across the country, which is, by the way, as somebody pointed out in the comments, incredibly mountainous. That's the other thing. On the coastline, as I've stated before, I've operated in the Gulf on 3 extended deployments as far north as just west of Karg Island a bunch of times. And the coastline is dramatic in terms of mountains right to the water's edge. It's not like the Med. And so this isn't something you can just decide I'm going to do. This is like Napoleon trying to take Moscow. So we need to really be mindful of their natural defenses. Like we have 2 oceans to defend us from threats. They have all of this land and these mountains to defend them, meaning the government in Tehran, from any potential adversary. So I think we need to be mindful of that before we would decide to do something like that. But again, this area and who gets their energy from this area, whether you like President Trump or not, or whether he was rude to you, which he was in recent months, that's beside the point. Like you say, Sal, they're going to the embassies now and like going, look, I get, I can't be seen on camera negotiating with you because our parliament or whatever isn't digging it right now, but we've got to get there. So what is the means to, plug into the machine that you guys are already leading?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough scenario. And again, go to your geography of Iran too. I mean, it's not the Strait of Hormuz, it's that whole 500-mile coast. I mean, you're always, between Qatar, Bahrain, and Iran. That's a tight little area too. And then when you're up around Kuwait and Basra, you're right there in the shadow of Iran. So it's not, when they did the tanker wars and they did the convoy operations in earnest will back in 87, 88, they had a convoy all the way from Kuwait out to Oman. And, that's the threat there. It's not even just opening the strait. It's ensuring that there's safe and free passage throughout the entire region, which makes this a real challenge. And you're exactly right. I mean, Iran, the reason Persia has existed for as long as it ever has is because of its geography. It was just able to resist invaders repeatedly. And, that's its natural defense there more than anything else. So it's tough. And that's why I think the focus right now is open the straits, maybe do some sort of operation. But again, we got to see, a kickoff in we need to see Ford potentially return or Bush come back out. We don't know how long Ford's going to be out. We know the U.S. Navy has done good job with repair facilities at Suda Bay. We saw that with Truman. Truman was able to kind of patch up what it needed after its collision north of Suez. We're assuming that's going on right now with Ford in Suda Bay. The Navy's been very kind of quiet about the extent of that fire. Obviously, it was severe enough to not just damage the laundry service on board the ship, the main laundry, but also some crew accommodations. So that's kind of significant that, we talked about boots, we talked about bedding, we talked about everything, we talked about crews sleeping in passageways and on tables. This is a ship that's experienced a long deployment, and obviously you want that air wing should you want to do something along, involving these forces. So do we see Bush expedited come out, or does Ford hang out here in the Eastern Med? Because he was in the Eastern Med for a lot of this operation too. She shifted down into the Red Sea largely when Yanbu became a major facility for outloading oil.
Yeah. So CENTCOM says on paper, Ford is still able to conduct war operations, and you kind of want to go, okay, stop, please, just stop. So like we said up front, we don't know how long the repairs are going to take. Remember what we briefed some weeks ago. In mid-January, the CNO's going in position about Ford being involved was no, not that ship. And they went through the roster. Right there. Okay, George Washington is not available. Okay, Bush hasn't even done Comp 2X yet. So not even close to having a blue water cert or anything else. So no. And so reluctantly, and I know CNO probably felt, I don't know, it sounds tried to say bad, but he had to reverse his promise to the crew and the air wing and say, hey guys, I know you've been jerked around. You got sortied from the Med to the Caribbean, and you got to do this thing, Absolute Resolve. And now we thought we're going to bring you home to do a planned availability for maintenance that's required, not optional. But now I got to send you back across the pond. That's insane in terms of what I've thought about during my 5 extended deployments during my career. I mean, we got extended on 2 of them. But extended meant 2 weeks. That was the extended part. One time it was Terry Waite got taken hostage in Lebanon. So we were in port in Spain and we got yanked out to go to the East Med and hang out. It turned out to be nothing ultimately. And then the second time when I was on Ike, Forrestal couldn't make the exercise in the North Atlantic. So instead of coming home, we had to turn right out of the Med and go up to the North Atlantic, which was quite sporty, as I've documented on the channel a number of times. And that's Hoser Miller was our CAG LSO, and he literally saved my life by using the manual lens system there, keeping my pilot off the ramp. But that's pretty minor. That meant a 6-month cruise became 6.5 months. These folks are talking about, to start, it was going to be 8 months long, which is already 2 months longer than anything that we would consider the paradigm back in the 80s, 90s, and aughts. And then they get extended for another, in some cases, 4 months. Like by the time Ford gets home, this will be almost a year. Never mind whether the cats work and the airplanes are full of gas. The people part, and this isn't news to CNO, or I'm sure it's not news to the admiral and the captain and CAG and everybody on board Ford. You salute, and this is what's so amazing about our personnel. But give me a break. And this is what Raina and I were talking about. Mid-airs and other stuff, fires and laundry spaces. We're kind of pushing our people beyond what is reasonable, and we got to watch that, because you start to reach diminishing returns, and we become our enemy's best friends. As I said in Punk's War, if only the enemy knew how well they were doing by doing nothing. Right. And that's kind of what we get into when we push our people too far. So we'll see what happens. Like we're saying, we don't know, is Ford going home? When's Bush getting underway? Certainly we never need everything we got still until we're done with Epic Fury as written. Meanwhile, other assets are taking up the slack on the air tasking order. That starts to have its other resonant effects, and not always a great way. So, these are a lot of items to consider. Final thoughts, Sal.
No, I think you hit on the head there, Ward. I mean, one of the concerns I have is we are pushing personnel, equipment to its limits, and when you start doing that, you can't be surprised when accidents happen, and that's the fear that I have all the time. We don't know what's going on the ground for the Air Force and their crews. You got to imagine those airframes and those crews are working around the clock and doing their operations. And we're kind of seeing that with the KC-135s and the issues associated with them. You run a platform that old, that long, you're going to have accidents. And Ford, while brand new carrier, operating again at sea for a long period of time, even equipment that's rated and doing proper maintenance, you run it long enough, you're going to have incidences, and fire is the worst fear you have on board a ship. We're seeing that with the civilian crews out in the Persian Gulf right now, being stuck, trapped. How long can they operate? When do we start seeing issues with accidents out in there where ships have to go in and have to do things? This is the concerns we start having with the operation. And, the fear is, what is that off ramp to this operation? What is the thing that kind of gets us out? One of the big things is, you got to have a clear definition of what your outweigh is going to be. And right now it's hard to see because, again, based on what you're hearing coming out of Iran, and we don't know where it's coming from out of Iran, we just know it's coming out of there from different offices, is, they're going to keep fighting and they keep, doing. And the fear is escalation, is that you start hitting their energy plants, they start hitting energy plants or desalinization plants in and around the Persian Gulf. This war takes a whole new, off ramp. And again, I'm watching that countdown right now on oil reserves going down, and that's, has global implications right there for energy markets. So hate to leave on a kind of a downward turn here, but it's going to be interesting to see how this goes over the next week or so.
Yeah, and that's the forcing function that will certainly facilitate or precipitate an end to Epic Fury, at least. And you can change the name of it, but we're probably not going anywhere in terms of regional presence, just because we're going to have to attend to pop-up threats, both to the Strait and to our Arab partners in the region and Israel. In the meantime, we'll continue doing these updates, mostly live stream. And don't forget to subscribe to Sal's channel if you're not already, because he's the busiest man in the biz right now with his regular episodes that are happening, 3x between us doing these live streams. So as Jerry Lewis used to say about the telethon, if you miss a little, you miss a lot. So do subscribe to both of our channels and get heads ups when new things are happening. And our promise to you guys is we'll come back and try to explain and frame things when the intel demands that we need to do an update. So Sal, as always, thanks for your time. Your time is very valuable. So thanks for joining us, and I'll look forward to having you aboard very soon.
Ward, thanks for having me. I look forward to when you and Rain get on, because then now I understand the aviation side much more. So I appreciate it. I'm happy to talk about the water side and the boat side. So
well, you got you got some cred points today because you recognize the Harriers on Boxer. So
yeah. I try. Listen, Ward, I do my best. I do my best that I can do. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And thanks again.
All right. We'll see you soon. Okay, that'll do it for this episode. Another good crowd today. As always, when I hang up here, it'll become a regular episode, so you can come back and check out the comments in the live stream. Thanks, everybody, for the super chat. Thanks for the productive comments in the chat. When you come back, you can also put comments when it's a regular episode like normal. And again, as I just said, if you're not a subscriber, please become one so you don't miss anything. You'll get heads up about live streams and so forth. So we have other things happening in terms of regular episodes. I'm actually going to talk to former CENTCOM in a few days, get his perspective, General McKenzie, on the war and other things. Going to talk to the F-35 test program's chief test pilot about a bunch of stuff on Friday. We're going to talk about the Phoenix AIM-54. So we're going to do stuff besides just war coverage, but it's no stretch to say right now the most important thing that we're covering is the war. So we'll continue to do that as the situation demands. So thank you guys for your support, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.